Hi everyone, welcome back to more garbage content. In this video we're going to add MySQL driver and a MySQL connection to our Ignition Maker gateway. I believe the Ignition, the full version of the software, adding a MySQL connection would be the same, or at least very similar, so you should be able to use the information in this video to add a MySQL database to your full version of Ignition. So the first thing you want to do is go to download MySQL. You don't need to do this step if you already have MySQL installed on a separate server, but in my case I'm running Ignition on my local computer, and I'm also going to run MySQL on the same local computer. So I'm going to first download it because I don't have it downloaded. I'll leave the download link below this video to make it easier on you. That way you don't have to look for the installer. You want to wait until it downloads. Once this software downloads, we'll run through the installation together. So now that it's downloaded, let's go ahead and run the installer. Right away, I want to install MySQL Workbench, which is a graphical tool, so that way you can query your MySQL databases, you can construct queries, just see your table structure, see and modify your table structure. I'm going to try to do it first try. I haven't done this for a while, so let's select custom here. Well, maybe there's Workbench. Let's select custom. We don't want some of the components. We do want MySQL Server. We want Workbench as well. I don't want this guy here. I'm not sure what this does. Let's go ahead and install, as well as this, MySQL connectors. This will be used later in this video. Let's go ahead and install both of these. I'm assuming J stands for Java. Let's install this one. And I believe that should be enough. Samples and examples. I hope this includes sample database tables, but we'll see. If not, we can always find. There's a database called the Northwind database. That's just a sample database. I know it's available for Microsoft SQL Server, but it might be available for MySQL as well. So if it is, I'll also leave it below the video. So that way it's easy to find. You just want to make sure you select the right components. You have to select MySQL Server, and then if you don't want to access your MySQL database through the command line, you should also install MySQL Workbench. That'll help you view your tables, modify your tables, create tables, also write complex queries or simple queries, and it'll allow you to test all your database related stuff right from that application. So let's go ahead and wait until all of these components install. Sweet, so now that it's installed, let's go ahead and click next, next. So in my case, the development computer would be the right setting here, but you determine your setting. So I think it just depends how much memory it allocates to MySQL, but I may be wrong. So I'm going to choose development computer. You might be installing it on a server, so in that case you would choose one of these other two options. We want to leave the default port 3306. Okay. Let's see what this gives us. I'm just going to set a sample password. Okay, add user, username. And since this isn't a production system, I'm not too worried about the password, but you do want to use a secure password because the port 3306 is a well-known port that's used with MySQL with a default installation. So either change the port, or better yet, change the port and set a secure password. Okay, this all looks fine. So let me go through these configuration steps. There we go. Finish. Next. So I'll accept the default settings. Okay. Execute. And finish. Okay, and finish. There we go. Here is my MySQL Workbench. We see this is the GUI software I was talking about. We see our local instance here. So I installed MySQL 8.0. I know a lot of companies still have MySQL 5.7 and 5.6 even. So it just depends. If it's a new installation, I would use 8.0 obviously. But you might run into legacy systems that still use 5.7 and below. So don't be too surprised. The jump goes from 5.7 to 8.0. There's no in-between versions as far as I know. Okay, you enter your password. Okay, here we are. So it did import some tables here. Okay. So we do have some sample data. So now that we have MySQL installed, remember you don't need to go through this step if you have it installed on a server that's on your network. Now let's go and actually add this database to Ignition. So you would go to, let me log out, log in, enter your password, and then go to config. So there's three main tabs. Obviously there's the home, the status, and the config tabs. Okay, and then let's go here to databases, this section here on the left. And first let's look at the database drivers. So we have MySQL already added for us. Let's go see why it's giving us an error. Okay. Most of the time, all of these settings you can leave as the default settings. But let's look at MySQL. I believe that was what was. So in the documentation, you can see the default settings for a couple different databases. There's MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, I believe, maybe an Oracle database. So here, MySQL. Connect URL is the same. So this, let's just leave it as it is. Class name is incorrect. I've seen this before. Okay, let me go back. I dealt with this maybe 2 days ago with a different database I was trying to add. I don't remember what I did. So let's go to the forum here. Oh, so it looks like MySQL 8.0 or Ignition 8 doesn't come with MySQL JDBC drivers because of the license. So let's go ahead and download the JDBC driver. If you're on Windows, make sure to choose Platform Independent here, and then you can choose a zip or whatever you want, whichever one you want. Wait for it to download. Let's open this here, extract it. Let's search for .jar files. Okay. Let's go ahead and just edit that here. And then add our connector and save changes. There we go. And we see that the error message here went away and became installed once again. This translators, if you're adding a custom or a not so well-known database, so as you see here, it comes pre-packaged with several different databases. If it's not in the list here, chances are it's not going to be in the translator list. All the translator is basically defines the syntax for the specific database implementation of SQL. But now that we have our driver installed, let's go back here on the left under the databases section to connections and create a new database connection. Let's choose MySQL here. Let's call this MySQL DB, something like that. Test database. MySQL project DB. I know this shouldn't be this hard to think of a name and description, but I always have trouble. And then here you enter your username and password that you specified during the installation. So there were actually a couple different usernames and passwords, but this one is asking for the one that defaults to root. So I think it was the first time that asked for a password. If you go back and rewind the video. So whatever you put in that field, you want to put in here. Most of the other settings we can leave as is. Let's click Create New Database Connection. If the connection doesn't succeed, or if authentication fails or some other error, we should get a faulted status here. And then whenever we get a faulted status, I'm actually surprised that it faulted, but it's also useful. Let's go ahead and click status here on the left side, databases, and we can hover here. Unknown database test. Okay. Let's go back. It's probably looking for maybe a default schema or something like that. Let's go back and edit this and see what it's talking about. Oh, here's the unknown database. So let's go back to our workbench and so let's do this one here. Let's first check if, okay, there it is. Kila. Sakila. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's an inside joke and I'm too stupid. Let's see if that works for us here. Okay, we can see that the connection, the status is now valid. Okay, once we added our database to our Ignition gateway, we can now use it in our projects. So let me go ahead and open Maker. Let's create a new view. So let's create a new folder first. Inside this folder, let's create a new view. We want a flex container, root container type, because that's arguably the best one. And here we can add a URL right away. Okay, so let's create a view. Onto this view we can drag a couple components. Let's make sure our flex direction is set to column. And then let's add a label. This label, we will say actors or something, because that's what we're going to display in a table. Let's add a padding, 10 pixels, and then let's also set our color to white, and our background color to blue. There we go. Onto this container, the root container, let's drag a table. There we go. So for the properties of the table, I'm going to set it to grow. I don't want it to hug the edges of the screen like this, so I'm going to add a padding to the style here all around. So let's add 10 pixels. Well, actually, let's add a margin of 10 pixels. Okay, so now comes the interesting part. Now we can actually see if we can see our database tables from our new connection. So you want to go ahead to see if you can see your database tables and query information from your database, the one that we just created. Go to Tools, go to Database Query Browser, and then here you select your database here. This is what we named it, remember, MySQL Project DB, and it pulls all of your tables. So here's your schema. Let's write some query. Okay, select star from actor. Hit execute, and then you get your result set here. So we know our database connection was successful because we can see the table values inside of the designer. So even though here it was valid, it's just a double check. Once you go to your designer, if you can see values inside the database query browser, then it's highly likely that you can then bind a table's data property. So actually, let's go a table's data property to a database table. So in Ignition 8, you can't just write a query. You have to use named queries, which is actually a good thing. So let's go ahead and create a named query here. New folder. This will be database examples. You can call it whatever you want, obviously. Let's create a new query. I usually set the name to the function of the query. So for example, this one we're going to get all actors. So I'll just name it like that. And then in your authoring section here, you're going to choose your database. Query is returns a data set. Scalar query returns a scalar, so a number. For example, if you insert or add a record and you want to return the unique ID that was generated when you inserted that record, you can do a scalar query. Then an update query is another type. Go to Inductive Automation's documentation to read up on the differences there. So let's go ahead and create a very simple query. Let's have name as a parameter, where I forgot what our table looked like. Let's say we're first name. Yeah. Where first name equals name. So this here references this parameter. And we want to return all from actor, this table. Let's go ahead and go to testing, and I'm not sure why it resizes this, but I see this on a full version of Ignition. It might be a bug or something. Let me enter a name that I know exists, Nick, for example. So Nick should return at least one record. Oh, okay, so there's 3 records, 3 first names, Nick. Let's make up a name. Okay. Right, so it's very simple and self-explanatory. Okay, let's hit save here. Go back to our perspective view. And let's go ahead and bind this table to our query that we just created. So it's going to, when you hit this browse button, it'll default to this named query scope, and then you select your function. So here, the return format, you can either specify a JSON return format or a dataset. It'll affect, obviously, the data that's returned. It'll be either a dataset type, so it's a built-in Ignition type, or it'll be a JSON. JSON is easier to use. Okay, and then it's asking for, it's asking for our value here. So this will be coming from, we'll add this in a minute. This will be coming from another variable that we'll bind to right now. Let's actually hit OK here. It'll give us an error, but let's deep select here and add another flex container on here. Let's set this flex container's basis to 50 pixels. Let's move it up here. And then this flex container, I want it to be set to row. I want a label. So I want basically that and a text field. Text field. So this here, let's set on the flex container, let's set padding left to 10 pixels as well. That way it's not scrunched up here. So this label we can set search first name, or enter first name. There we go. This, let's make this a little bit bigger. And then here, let's actually do this padding. There we go. This guy we want to set to make it also longer. There we go. So we're going to enter our first name, and then our data set here will update on its own as we're entering the name. So let's go back to our table, our binding here, and then we can finally bind this this name parameter to our flex container text field props.text. Okay, let's click off. Okay. Click OK, and then let's hit play here. So Jerry, I believe, was a valid one. Okay, let's keep Jerry in here and see why. Oh, so it's not. It may not be a valid one. So let's keep Jerry in there, right? Or Nick. Nick was the one. Sorry, I'm kind of stupid. There we go. So I'm not even sure if you need to, well, I guess you do need to hit the enter key for the table to update. But there we go. So in this video, once again to recap, we added a MySQL database connection to our Ignition installation. Realized that other database vendors will be very similar to the process we followed for MySQL. And then after we added the MySQL database connection, we tested it in our designer, and then we created a very simple project that pulls data from one of the tables that came with our MySQL installation, namely the actors table. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, let me know in the comments. I actually started a Discord server that nobody's logged on to, sadly. So if you have questions about Ignition, I will probably be most active on there. Otherwise, I thank you for watching. Hopefully that was worth your time, and stay tuned until I drop my next garbage video. Anyway, I will see you in the next video.